Yeah, so thanks everyone for sending in your questions. I'm going to try to bunch these around some particular topics that we've addressed over the weekend, and so yeah. So I'm assuming most of you know who's on the stage here, but just in case you don't, so Renee. Everyone should know Renee, but so serves on staff, one of our deacons. Jake and Renee have led GC, weren't for a season, but now you guys just launched brand new GC. You're 2 weeks in.
Yeah, we've just met one time. So.
Okay, yeah. So Jackie Staniak, who also serves on staff with us, and you guys have been leading. You and Mike have been leading GC how long now?
3 years. 3 seasons, I think.
Okay, yeah, so you guys are like experts now. Yeah, came into Gospel Community as a non-Christian. And then the guru of GCs himself, Pastor Paul. So I want to start off with this question. Paul suggested that this would be a good one just as a way to get this group talking. As you kind of think about your experiences in GC, what have been, and this can either be positive or negative or one of both, but what have been some formative experiences that you have had in Gospel Community, either as a leader or a participant, that have really shaped how you engage GC?
So, as Paul said, we came into Gospel Communities as non-believers. So we got connected one Sunday, and then we were pursued by the Millers. So one thing that was really formative for us, in the early weeks and months of going, we were really inconsistent. We would just show up when it fit our schedule or when we weren't too tired. But we had come into the church pregnant and didn't know a ton of people. We just wanted to fix our life up quick and make some friends. And after we had the baby, we had a meal train started. And we didn't even have a category for that kind of love. The friends that we had, it was like every man for themselves. And so we had strangers from the church coming to our house and dropping off meals for us. And I think that was so pivotal in experiencing Christ's love for us through the church. One person in particular, Michelle Kuba, I don't think she's here, but I had no idea who she was. And she just came to our home and gave us a meal. And I remember vividly thinking, I have never experienced a love like this in my whole life. So,
I think for me, one of the things that's been formative is I've been in I was in Gospel Community with people for a long, long time, people who I'd known for years and years. And through that, if you've been around people that long, you start to have conflict. And just realizing that seeing other people's humility in entering into conflict with me and vulnerability and seeing their forgiveness. And so just getting to experience those things, we talk about those things a lot, and we talk about, hey, we should forgive one another. We should show vulnerability, but seeing other people do that and go through some pretty hard conflict and coming out on the other side and still being with one another.
Yeah, I think the season that I look back on where that probably sticks out the most is the first Gospel Community we launched at Coram Deo. It wasn't very good. It was actually really not your typical picture of health. It was kind of like we got stuck in the forming phase, to be really honest. The conversation was superficial. Everybody was kind of after the right answers, and we eventually, that community dissolved, and that was actually a really good thing in that particular season. And what happened was my dad was in a really bad car accident where his spinal cord, he was paralyzed from the chest down, and just kind of honestly, the Lord taught me how to suffer during that season, taught us how to suffer through a variety of different things. And coming out of that season, what we realized was a lot of the things we're talking about today, that we needed community There was a different level of what community should look like. And so in leading through real vulnerability and being honest about our struggles with sin and being honest about how we needed others, and rooting ourselves, like in pursuing God's word together, the Lord did some remarkable things. And so I think like we learned a lot through failure, and we learned a lot through suffering moved us to actually experience something healthy.
Wow, you guys are all the questions are coming now. Thank you for continuing to send your questions. And like, this would have been helpful like 15 minutes ago when I was organizing them. So I was planning on waiting to get into this line, but a lot of questions coming in. So I think I want to start with this discussing some dynamics around multiplication, because I think this is on a lot of people's hearts. How many of you have been part of a multiplication? Okay, so we're not talking about something that only a few people have experienced. So a lot of questions around this seems to be something that people are burdened for doing well and thinking about well. So how do we think through relationships in a gospel community when the prospect of multiplication is something that we're hoping for, we're praying for? How do we, maybe I should start with this question, is how do we work to build authentic relationships when we know there's kind of a multiplication clock that we're on? How do we do that without trying to do this kind of in a forced sort of programmatic way? How have you guys maybe experienced that or saw that play out?
So one of the things, I was part of a gospel community. It was Paul's gospel community that multiplied like every couple months. That might be exaggeration.
Exaggerating.
But it did multiply a lot. But I think one thing like I have realized is so when the purpose of a gospel community is discipleship and we're focusing on that, relationships form. The goal isn't necessarily to form relationships, but the cool thing is that the relationships are formed and you have really cool relationships that come out of pursuing the same thing alongside one another. And so you don't have to get these categories in your head like, how do I pursue this relationship, but rather, how do I disciple one another? And then those relationships just form. And so rather than protecting ourselves from that, they're a natural byproduct of it. I think there's more to it than that, but...
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it comes kind of back down to what we talked about you have something to offer the group and they have something to offer you, and you're ministering to each other. And so you have a choice on how you're going to spend that time together. And I think often organically what happens is deep-rooted relationships based on what is happening during your time in that group. But also, acknowledging that you bring value to the group as well as everyone else is bringing value to you. So you have a choice on how you're going to spend that time together.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is, so something Renee was alluding to, are relationships ultimate when it comes to how we're interacting with gospel community? They shouldn't be. What should be ultimate is that our relationship with Christ, we're centered on Christ, we're centered on this mission of making disciples. Do relationships matter? Yes, 100%. And so as we think about multiplication, there is a sense of multiplication typically takes more of my pastoral resources than the average gospel community, because we very much think about coordinating with the new leaders on how will this community be multiplied? How are you guys thinking about those relationships? How are we thinking about helping people grieve or helping people celebrate what's going on? Like we're thinking about those things. And so, yes, relationships very much matter. And I think every multiplication that I've been a part of to varying degrees, there's always opportunities to do this better. We are not, I had this happen one time. Our first multiplication coming out of Coram Deo, we had talked to the pastor, we talked to the gospel community leaders about multiplying, and they were like, yes, we want you guys to launch a new gospel community from the one you're in. And so we show up, the GC leader, the gospel community leader had agreed to multiply us out. Okay, hey, we're sending out the gardeners tonight. Evan and Jamie, Steph and Skip, you guys are going with the gardeners. Everybody else, you're staying with us. That should never happen. That should never happen. Very much you all should be part of the process. Now, you may not get what you want, like every time, but there should be a predictable process that's playing out over the course of a period of time, a few weeks, where there's a conversation like, hey, multiplication is on the calendar. We're thinking about who's going to be in these two new communities. There's going to be sacrifices. You guys are going to grieve. We want to do that well. We want to think about the relationships. Doesn't mean we all get what we want, but we are thinking about those factors. And so, yes, not ultimate, but very much something we want to think about.
So continuing along this line.
Would you add anything to that?
No, I think as just what's hard here is I think Renee makes a really good point, which is a hard dynamic, I think, to sometimes explain, where, hey, the relationships community absolutely matter. Like, we do this together, we're family, like, we're not minimizing that. But if that becomes the focus rather than discipleship, we actually get off kilter, and those relationships actually, they form in ways that I think are less deep and less rich and less purposeful. And so there's a sense in which we're saying, yeah, community relationships absolutely matter, but discipleship is what we're after here. That's what we're ultimately aiming for. And when discipleship becomes the thing that is ultimately at the center, and Christ is at the center, one, it has the product of deepening relationships, and two, I think it actually keeps us from some of the self-protection that I think we at times are tempted to feel. And so that's where I want to get inside this a little bit more. And you guys have asked some good questions. So one question, or actually this question came in different forms, and so I want to just put this in front of you guys. Isn't it true, though, that relationships take time? And with multiplication being this reality, aren't we sort of like working against the kind of relationships we would want because we're not giving people enough time to be together in gospel community? How if someone was, someone's asking that question, how would you kind of walk them through that, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, I'd go back to, is our ultimate end having a particular kind of relationship, or is it about this mission of making disciples? I would really, that is the thing that we're asking the question. Is, what are we ultimately after? Is it for us to experience a particular kind of relationship, or are we after this mission of making disciples? And if we're after this mission of making disciples, that's going to require us to surrender these relationships to varying degrees. That does not mean we don't experience loss. We absolutely do. But if there is a sense of the thing we are ultimately about is making disciples, then there are adjustments, flexibility that has to play out. And we trust that what God has done with our particular community, where we are working in this direction, how God is navigating this situation, how God has led our leaders of this church, that we trust that the Lord is sovereign over all of that. That yes, we didn't get to achieve a particular point, but we are going to surrender achieving that particular point to this mission of making disciples.
It kind of makes me think of our military friends that come for a short amount of time and then leave, and how we just spend that time loving them, serving them, getting to know them, and then when it's time for them to leave, it's not time lost. They go on to serve another community, and it's just like GC. We get a little bit of time to love, serve, grow, and be discipled and disciple, and then they go to another community to replicate that somewhere else.
Yeah, and to that point, I think this is where our military friends can be instructive. This is what I love about being a military community. You guys come here and you're like, let's go. Let's get it. I only got 3 years, and so let's become friends. Let's do stuff together. Like there's this immediate desire to be part and to be plugged in. And so I think when that question came in, I was sitting back there thinking about it, because it's a good question. It's a really good question, and I kind of felt the tension in it. But there's also, I think, a piece to this that it does take time to build relationships. I'm not minimizing that. But the time it takes somewhat is up to you. Like how much you want to offer and how quickly you want to offer and how much you want to, engage that and invest in that. And so I think our stories can affect that and various experiences. And so again, those things are real and I'm not minimizing that. But there is a reality. I think you can go deep and you can develop those relationships probably much shorter than you realize. If you're willing, if there's a group of people willing to go there, if they're willing to say, hey, I'm here, we're going to be, I want to engage this well, and, whether this is going to be a 2-year GC, a 1-year GC, a 5-year GC, whatever the amount of time we're going to be together, I want to make the most of the time we have together. And so I want to encourage you all to just consider that, hey, relationships, while they take time, don't necessarily need to take the amount of time that maybe you think they do. And what does that say about, hey, we just maybe need to open up more quickly or be intentional in some ways. And so that was, I think that's one thing that I just want to, kind of encourage people and kind of, leverage that our military friends experience, those who are part of our church, and kind of see them as models and of how that plays out. So if you have any other thoughts.
I mean, I think part of the way to those relationships form faster is when you're on mission together. Like if you've been on a sports team, you'll see like, hey, we're all after something together. And so those relationships actually form a lot faster than if you're like, hey, I'm just going to hang out with these people once in a while. And I think it also encourages us to spend more time together because you need that time together to really get to know one another. And so just it requires more sacrifice as well.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time if your only interaction is one night a week at GC. Like that's just, yes, that takes a long time. But if it is, it's like, hey, let's hang out as people do and let's get together, have you over, we come over, let's go do things together. It's going to just that natural friendship and relationships going to develop. So maybe a harder angle to this and engage, just sort of respect that some people come in with stories where they've been deeply wounded by community. They have, maybe it has taken them a lot of time to get to a place where they are trusting the gospel community they're in. They've been on a journey to where now they're opening up. Here's my safe place for people, for me to share. I know this group loves me. And now you're asking me to reset. How do we work through that? Pastor Paul.
So I think there's two things here. I think one, so with this last GC that multiplied, we very much, the individuals in that gospel community had a voice in how that multiplication played out. There are particular people I want to maintain relationships with, and so there was a sense of we don't want you to like entirely reset with a brand new group of people. We want you to maintain connection with at least some of the people you're really comfortable with. And so that was very much part of the dialogue was, hey, as you participate in the life of this gospel community, as you think about a new gospel community, who are you connecting with? Who are the people? I don't want to necessarily overemphasize safety because there's aspects of this that are hard, but who are the people who you are close to that you've opened up to, and how can we think about that as a factor when it comes to resetting this gospel, to launching a new gospel community? We very much want to consider that. So that's a pastoral concern. The second thing I would say is I also am at a place where let's not try to make gospel community too much. Like your community may not be the place for all that healing to happen. There may be some resources beyond your gospel community that we want, that you need to connect with an older woman in the church. You need to connect with a pastor. You need to connect with an older man in the church to be able to process through some of those things. And let's not make gospel community the only place where people experience redemption. Good. Yeah, there are other contexts that not every situation of suffering, the context that is most appropriate is the gospel community. And so reach out to resources beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Not to make GC. I mean, it's a starting place. It's ground zero. There's a lot of your community at First City that is contained in your GC. But it doesn't have to be the be all and end all. So, for example, and hopefully this doesn't sound weird, but so Jake and Renee are some of, as far as like I think of who are our closest friends in the church. So Jake and Renee, for Mindy and I, we've been in GC with you guys like one time.
Yeah, for like less than a year.
Yeah, less than a year. So I say that to say there can be relationships that start in GC and there's multiplication and you can continue. You don't have to go, well, we can't hang out anymore. We're not in the same GC anymore. Like some relationships are going to continue forward. Still invest in those people. It's not like you're, saying goodbye to them forever, So I think it is a helpful kind of counterbalance to recognize while multiplication does change some dynamics, it doesn't, you don't feel like you have to I need to completely re-alter all of my friendships or all of my relationships. There's still ways those things can carry forward. And so for those of you that have done the work and developed those good relationships with people that provide that safety and have walked with you in things, and now maybe you're multiplying out and you're not necessarily in the same GC, hey, they can still be that for you, very much so. They can still walk with you. There's still outlets for that. And so we want to be clear that, hey, GC it doesn't have to be the be all and end all for you in some of these things. And so acknowledging that multiplication adds a dynamic here that is challenging. And the tensions you guys and the question you guys are raising and the questions you guys are asking are good. So there's a way in which this doesn't just neatly get resolved. And there's a way in which even if we give good explanations of what we're trying to get after and we're about, and we can sort of acknowledge, hey, yeah, this is what we're trying to do, it's still hard and it's okay. In fact, it should be, because I think it speaks to the depth of relationships that we are developing, the fact that it is hard. If it was just like, well, we did this thing for a while, peace out, maybe I'll see you on Sunday, that would just not, we would say, hey, something's not happening in GC that we want to happen. So I want you guys to recognize, we want you guys to recognize that the tensions and the questions you're asking are good, and they're the byproduct of some of the tough parts of mission, I think, and us not wanting to just sort of settle into being comfortable. So we value that, and we're grateful that you guys are engaging that openly and honestly. So want to transition a little bit to talking about conversations in GC. I think a good question. I mentioned this in our in the breakout this morning, that some people experience our church is like super heady, and some people experience our church as too emotional. And I think that is great, because it just shows that, hey, we're after the combination of both of those realities. But one of the things that one of the challenges that can kind of happen in a gospel community, especially since we're courting and asking for people to be open and honest, is some of the things that people share can at times be, whoa, or maybe be shared. There can be an openness and honesty, but maybe there are ways in which it isn't helpful. So we'd love for you guys to talk about this. What's the difference between authenticity and oversharing, trauma dumping, in an unhelpful way. Yeah, Steph, you want to answer this one?
No, great question. And I do think if we think about just the sense of sharing on a spectrum, most of us, just to be really honest, most of us are prone to self-protective kind of behaviors. We're prone to like keep everything close to the vest. But there can be a sense that rather than undersharing, some of us can overshare. And so what does oversharing look like? And I think a lot of that comes, there's a discernment that plays out here from the standpoint of, is somebody sharing for more, they're sharing not for the sake of what it looks like to submit and surrender to Christ, but more a sense of, there's almost like a safety in, I want you to know all my challenges and all my struggles. I want you to know all that, and so I need to get all that out. And so by getting all that out, there's a safety for me. But it actually is not about the group growing as disciples. And so we want to avoid that kind of motivation where there's just this safety in being able to dump. We want to call people to a sense of what it looks like to submit and surrender to Christ. And so there are also this oversharing, trauma dumping. Like, how are we talking about other people is a piece of this. If they were in the room, would they be okay with how we're sharing to various degrees, right? So we're not just putting someone else's story out there. We're stewarding that story of that other person well. And so those are kind of two of the things I think about when it comes to maybe oversharing.
It could be an indication that person needs to, you maybe need to hang out with them outside of GC too. More time to get to know them and hear their story in a more intimate setting than a group setting.
Did you add anything to this?
The one quick thing to just kind of build off what you said, Paul, is, there's a difference between, and I think I've said this before in different contexts, where there's a kind of confession that isn't followed by repentance, and there's a kind of sharing that isn't inviting people to speak into and to walk with. And so I think one of the things that we personally need to be mindful of is not just, hey, the point isn't just to share what's going on. It's I'm sharing in order to put this before God's word and God's people so that they can speak truth to me and so that they can enter in. And I think when people, like if you're experiencing people and they're sharing and it seems like, hey, you're sharing very honestly, but I'm not entirely sure you're sharing in such a way that you want, questions to be asked, input, God's word to be spoken. I think that's where, you have to kind of lean in a little bit. That's what we're after. We're not just after, hey, just to be authentic, just to be for authentic sake. We're being open and honest because we want God's word to transform us, and the people of God are the means by that. So just being aware of that. I think being aware of that in ourselves, and then just kind of as we're listening to other people, and this is where asking good questions and trying to move in really, I think, is helpful. All right, moving on. Sorry, we only have a short amount of time for each kind of category. Let's talk about some shared leadership dynamics alongside kind of group dynamics, kind of form, the stages you were talking about. Just like very relatively simple question. So someone asked, why did you flip the storming and norming, the order of storming and norming from the original?
Why did I flip this? I think for gospel communities, I think storming comes after norming.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, because there is a sense of we start to get comfortable with one another, and people are sharing to varying degrees, and really then we move into the conflict. And so many of us, like in the organizational culture, that probably comes earlier because people are jockeying for their particular position. I think when it comes to gospel community, we're not jockeying for our particular position. What happens is we become comfortable with one another, and then we start to hurt one another. And so then we experience that storming phase.
So do the stages, are they linear in nature, or can they, like, is there a dynamic where you can kind of move, maybe you move forward, then move back?
Yes. Those stages are not necessarily linear by any means. So like even, this multiplication that happened with the Hida Hills, right? Gospel community, they may not even start in a forming phase because there's a culture that's been established and there's something already playing out, and so there may be a way they jump into like more of that stage 2 right away, maybe. But the other thing is there just is a sense of, man, you're launching in the fall. You rest during the summer. You got military people who leave. You got different people coming in. It is definitely not linear. So there can be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There can be, we experience conflict, and so now people want to step away from community a little bit to feel a little bit safer, or we can. There is not a timeline that people particularly follow. Those stages are predictable in the sense that those are kind of the stages, but there is not a linear way they play out.
Yeah. So several people wrote in with kind of this topic idea that one of the challenges we can face as far as kind of progressing through the stages is various dynamics within a GC where maybe you have some folks who aren't committed, and so their attendance is spotty. You have other folks that are, maybe they just have different ideas about what GC should be, and they kind of are just like putting that forward, maybe a strong personality. Talk about how you guys have experienced working through kind of some of the challenges of not everybody either being committed or on the same page, and how do you kind of work through those things as a GC to kind of move and progress in the ways that you should?
I mean, I think some of that takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. Like when you have a GC where, there's we've had some with spotty attendance, and we've had some where, people have come from another church and so have a different idea of what a small group is supposed to look like. Some of that just has to play out over like repeatedly doing the same thing over and over, and people begin to catch something different.
I think the big thing here is don't share leadership with people who are less committed, or like if you have somebody who's like, hey, I'll do the meal rotation, I'll be responsible for that, but they're like 2 out of 4 weeks in the month, they shouldn't be invited into that level of ownership. And so with that kind of mindset, like your gospel community, what you want, and I think the healthiest gospel communities they will have people coming in and out. The healthiest gospel communities will. But there also is a core group of people who are very consistent, who are there every week. And that core group of people, that consistent group of people, they are committed to building that culture. They are committed to sharing ownership. They are committed to being there for one another and living out kind of this sense of, I need community and others need me. And so there is a core group that kind of everybody else is oriented around, that is living out what we're talking about.
Yeah, and the key there is group, not leaders. that it is a group of people, not just on the leaders. And so when you do have people who aren't attending consistently, it's not just the leader reaching out, it's other people reaching out. If there's somebody in the group that maybe just, strong personality and kind of seems to always be pushing against what you're trying to do, it's not just the leader kind of having conversations with those folks, it's people in the group. And so building up a real sense of core group in your gospel community that's owning the culture together, I think is is vital to progressing through these stages. Because you can have people that are, kind of on the peripheral for whatever reason. You want to bring them, you want to try to bring them in, but they're just going to, might exist there. But if you have that core center that is shaping the group, driving what goes on, then I think you can absorb some of that, those who are, kind of on the margins, and it not keep you from growing and progressing as a group.
I imagine this is how our first GC felt with Mike and I when we first began, because we would show up when we wanted, we would maybe bring a bag of chips, we would maybe come to girls and guys night, but the group remained consistent in who they were and what they were structured around. And so Mike and I knew, like, if we're going to be part of this group, we're going to catch something. We're going to catch what they're about eventually. And eventually we worked into being more consistent participants of that group and learned what they were doing. We learned how to participate. We learned that we had to show up. We learned that we needed to have skin in the game. And they eventually, as we became more consistent, gave us more, responsibility or delegated tasks to us. And then that cycle repeated itself once we gave our lives to Christ and were consistent participants. Then we got to model that then for the next, wave of people coming in that came in consistently and didn't bring it, brought a bag of chips maybe. So it's just kind of this like ebb and flow of learning and teaching and learning and teaching.
Yeah. Did you have people like as far as the caught and the taught piece, like how did that play out? So like there's a piece of it you observed people were being committed, but anybody go, hey, you guys need to bring stuff?
No, not really. There was this like grace at the beginning, like, hey, well, you guys are just trying it out, just come. And then there was this, hey, I'm going to go ahead and send you the food sign up. So it was like, oh, okay, it's time for us to start bringing food. And I think there were explicit conversations and check-ins that were had with us. But there was a lot of grace and mercy for us as we learned what it looked like to actually give ourselves to this mission.
Yeah, so love that. And one of the things that I love about you, Jackie, is you are direct with a lot of grace. And that's not always easy for people. So for the GC leaders, GC members who are trying to navigate that tension of, hey, when should I press in with this person? When should I give grace? Like how to think about that? How would you kind of advise to sort of think about working with, you got a particular individual or a couple that is, you just want to see them to be more committed, and how do you kind of navigate grace and directness?
So I think one thing I've tried to adopt is just being, slower to speak and just to observe and get to know them a little bit, to understand, their life circumstances, and then just ask questions to understand, like, hey, I saw you guys miss last week. What happened? We missed you. Okay, what challenges and barriers are they facing in regards to getting to GC? Hey, I saw that you guys are really consistent at GC, but I don't see you much on Sundays. What's going on there? And getting to know them, just asking more questions, and then, partnering with them to help break down some of those barriers. But yes, the question, help me to understand, has just been so pivotal in how I enter in with people.
Yeah. So if you need more help on challenging people in a graceful way, Jackie is the expert there. She is, yeah. Go ahead.
It's important to know, like we talk about the consumeristic mindset as like a negative thing in lots of ways, but it's important to know that there should be consumers periodically checking out your gospel community, right? This is people who are new to our church, people who are your non-Christian friends, like they're coming as consumers in lots of ways. And that's okay. That's okay. Like this is, now we don't want them to remain consumers, but there is this reality that some of the people coming into our gospel communities are going to be more in that mindset. And that's all right. We're just, that's part of discipleship, is discipling. We were probably in that place too at one point, where we were discipled out of more of a consumeristic mindset to being more of a consistent contributor.
So this is, I mean, we're coming up at the end here, and so there's a couple questions that I want to get at that maybe connect us to broader church in some ways. And so this first question is kind of going back to something you said earlier about maybe there are other outlets for people to get care. And so someone asked the question, how should GC members engage kind of the big sort of sins, things like infidelity, abuse, self-harm, divorce? What are just, I mean, those are heavy things. How should GC leaders and GC members think about caring for people in those spaces in GC? And then what would you maybe say in how a GC should think about that, and then how we're thinking about that like broader church, bigger church?
Yeah, I think so. When we talk about every Christian is involved in discipleship, there is a sense in which there are certain situations where the discipleship playing out in some of those heavier situations, rather than being driven by the gospel community, should be driven by the pastors, leaders, deacons of the church. And the gospel community then, rather than driving the discipleship of individuals in such situations, should play just a more of a supportive role. How can we be praying for you? How can we be coming alongside you? When was the last time you connected with a pastor? And so it moves from the primary place that this person is growing, receiving discipleship, is less the gospel community and more places like counseling or connecting with a pastor, a particular leader in the church who is more able to navigate those situations. That's my thought.
Yeah, I wonder if you guys have any maybe experiences, the way you've seen GCs kind of do what Paul was describing, coming alongside people, not necessarily in the primary way, but in a supportive role.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen where members of the GC, there's been something really hard going on. We've brought in Paul or Chris, but then also seeing members of the gospel community care in some of the really practical ways, even having people move in the house with them, or caring for kids during hard situations, or doing meals, praying for one another. So I think there's a lot of practical ways the GC can come alongside in those situations.
Yeah, I've seen it play out in just maybe the person is, taking the lead from the pastor, and then the pastor's instructing them, hey, you go to your GC and ask them for this kind of support. And so it's very much more direct, and then we're able to help in a way that's productive and doesn't hurt or derail the situation.
Yeah, I think hurt or derail, like the big thing we don't want to have happen in that kind of situation is the gospel community is almost setting themselves up in opposition or in contradictory ways to the pastoral council or the direction that's coming from the leaders of the church. And so I think that's real. The communication pathways need to be more prevalent in those type of situations.
Okay, last question. This one we're gonna kind of end on a relatively fun, interesting theological question. I'm gonna kick this to Renee.
This is a fun theological question for Chris.
So Renee, should we partake in communion at GC? Why or why not?
Can I just give a yes or no answer? No. No.
No. If someone were to ask you that, why you say no, which is the correct answer, by the way. What would you say is the reason?
I mean, so
sorry if this feels like I'm putting you on the spot.
I mean, it is a little on the spot, so
Yeah.
feel free to correct me if this answer is incorrect. Yeah. Off the cuff, I would say communion is something that should be taken in the church. So it's a church activity. And while gospel communities are part of the church, they aren't the church, and there's no elder there to I forget the word, but to distribute the communion. And so it isn't actually the church itself. And so we need to be doing that within the church.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, this is why I kicked it to you. I was fully confident. So, no, the reason I wanted to end on that question, because I think it's, I don't know who sent it in. It's a good question in some ways, but I think it also addresses, I think, an important piece here, is that, gospel community is a vital part of our church and is a means for our discipleship, care, community. Like so much of our mission is done through gospel communities. But to Renee's point, an individual gospel community is not the church. We are the church together, and there's a sense in which that singular gospel community is connected to something bigger. And theologically speaking, the Lord's Supper, one of the sacraments, so baptism and the Lord's Supper, and these are given to the church to be practiced as a communal experience, a full communal experience, and they are to be administered and overseen by elders, not just, laypersons. So even me being an elder, or Paul being an elder, or Kyle being an elder, leading a gospel community, yeah, there's a sense in which, we have been authorized by the church to administer the sacraments, but we're not going to do it in that context. Why? Because it's not the entire church. And so there's something about Sunday mornings that is distinct and unique that we need to also remember and keep in mind, that gospel community in no way, shape, or form replaces Sunday morning. That what happens on Sunday cannot be replicated in gospel community. And so we want to be able to have a robust view of gospel community, but we want to have it properly situated and understood within the larger context of the church. And so there's things on Sunday that we do that are unique and distinct because that is us together as one big family, and that there's leadership and authority that's being exercised there through the preaching of God's word, through the administration of sacraments, that is unique and special and beautiful. And from the overflow of that, then we go and we live in gospel community to carry forward the mission. So I don't know, whoever sent that question in, I'm guessing you probably weren't expecting that full, robust answer, but you set something up very well to show how gospel community exists within the larger structure. And how there's some distinctions there. And so it's a beautiful interaction, and that's why those are our two big rocks. And so thank you guys for your questions. There are a number of questions folks sent in that we weren't entirely able to get to. Some of them were good questions, but maybe a little more practical. And if you sent one in, we didn't answer it, and you really would like to talk to us, please, we would love to be able to answer those questions. So follow up. But any other concluding thoughts?
No, just be on the lookout for that email from us with the recordings of the sessions as well as feedback for your time here. We really, really, really value your feedback just in making sure we're stewarding your time well. And if there are opportunities for us to teach into other things, we want to know what those are.